Hi, everyone. Welcome to Exploring Sunday's Scriptures. These are looking at the scriptures that we will be using on October 31st, 2021. This opportunity coming to you on Tuesday preceding that worship. I do want to highlight a little bit about what I've done in the sense of scriptures as we are following the discipline of the lectionary at least through Advent, so up until the end of November. And the lectionary is that 3-year cycle of scriptures that essentially encourages us to read through the majority of the Bible collectively as a community of faith over the course of 3 years. It's a good discipline in that we have to encounter difficult passages alongside of many of our favorite passages, and so forces congregations as well as those who proclaim the good news, pastors, to deal with those passages, to help with the understanding and what they communicate as God's truths through the ages. Now, when it comes to the lectionary, there are a lot of options that are there. And the Sunday, 2 Sundays ago, dealt with the Zebedee brothers and their desire to sit on Jesus's left and right. I talked about that. Then we had our Children's Sabbath, which actually took on just a part of the passage that preceded that week, which means we kind of went backwards. So we would have in the lectionary, if we were following it, last Sunday would have been the 42nd chapter of Job, Hebrews chapter 7, and Mark chapter 10, verse 46 through 52. We would have been following sequentially through that. We ended up skipping over that because of Children's Sabbath. Well, then we arrive at All Saints, or shortly thereafter, All Saints. We are the Sunday before All Saints, and so it becomes the challenge. There are unique passages that are encouraged to be used for All Saints, or you can follow the lectionary for what that Sunday would be, as All Saints technically is November 1st. What I've done is decided to use those scriptures which are unique for All Saints, and so taken on the scriptures that would be for November the 7th, but dealing with them on the 31st, so that when we return to the lectionary on the 14th, we are back in sequence rather than skipping all around. However, that does mean we've managed to kind of skip all around or skip chunks of things as a result. We've skipped the story of blind Bartimaeus. We've skipped the story of Mark 12, 28 through 34, which is which of the commandments is the greatest commandments. The very beginning of Ruth as our transition in Old Testament out of Job, and more from Hebrews. We are still in Ruth as we encounter it now this week. We remain in Hebrews, which is a very long book of the New Testament, and in Mark, but now further ahead in the 12th chapter. So let's jump right in and read these. I'll read them in 2 forms, the New Revised Standard and the Message form, just to give us a little exposure. And I'll talk a little bit about them and share some of my initial impressions and reflections with you, praying that you might return to these scriptures a couple of times before Sunday, so that as that word is heard again and also proclaimed, you may have had some exposure to it, and so it can really land on fertile ground, if you will. So beginning with our Old Testament, as I said, if we'd followed in some ways, we would have had the very beginning or introduction to Ruth. We're now in the 3rd chapter with where we pick up the story in this week. Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." She said to her, "All that you tell me, I will do." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." And Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, if we think, of the movement of Old Testament to New Testament and the movement of the liturgical year, giving us this lineage of Jesse should make us begin to think about Advent and what will happen in Advent. The lectionary year does have this arc within it that intends to draw us towards that calendar and the important events and celebrations that are part of that calendar. So there is some intention that is here. I wanted to somewhat look at the lineage here of Ruth and Naomi. Now, Naomi is widowed at this point, and Ruth is one of her daughter-in-laws who also is widowed. So Naomi had 2 sons who also died. Ruth was a Moabite by birth, whereas Naomi was a Hebrew. And so this is a way of incorporating somebody who is not of the same lineage into that lineage and being a Moabite. Let me read it from the Message version before I share a little more. One day her mother-in-law Naomi said to Ruth, "My dear daughter, isn't it about time I arranged a good home for you so you can have a happy life? And isn't Boaz our close relative, the one with whose young women you've been working? Maybe it's time to make our move. Tonight is the night of Boaz's barley harvest at the threshing floor. Take a bath, put on some perfume, get all dressed up and go to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you're there until the party is well underway and he's had plenty of food and drink. When you see him slipping off to sleep, watch where he lies down and then go there. Lie at his feet to let him know that you're available to him for marriage. Then wait and see what he says. He'll tell you what to do." Ruth said, "If you say so, I'll do it just as you've told me." Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife. Boaz slept with her. By God's gracious gift, she conceived and had a son. The town women said to Naomi, "Blessed be God, he didn't leave you without family to carry on your life. May this baby grow up to be famous in Israel. He'll make you young again. He'll take care of you in old age. And this daughter-in-law who has brought him into the world loves you so much, why, she's worth more to you than 7 sons." Naomi took the baby and held him in her arms, cuddling him, cooing over him, waiting on him hand and foot. The neighborhood woman started calling him Naomi's baby boy, but his real name was Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. So a couple of things, I suppose, that just pop out at me is how different arrangements were at that time. It can feel in some ways like entrapment upon our first reading, to entrap Boaz into this marriage. But it certainly wasn't that in the way and customs of that time. The other thing that's at play here, sort of in the background, that the first couple of chapters give us, is that with Naomi's husband dead, and with Ruth's husband also dead, they both are without identity. They have no security left in their life, because particularly at that time and in that culture, your security, financial and otherwise, rested upon the patriarchal reality, so the men. and flowed through the men. So if Ruth's husband had still been alive, which would have been Naomi's son, that would have ended up being the care provided to Naomi in old age, as well as, of course, the care provided to Ruth. With both of them as widowers, they have absolutely no security. They have no property, or if they do, it is minimal at best. They have no position or place in the society, and so really are relying upon the goodwill of others. And we learn in this that Ruth has been helping out on the threshing floor alongside of the Hebrew women that were there. We can assume that these were other women of the community that may or may not have been married. It doesn't prove to be an important point in this passage. What Naomi does is encourage her based on the customs, the Hebrew customs, of how to approach and ultimately secure, security. Some of it is a happy life and husband and ultimately offspring as a result of that too. But she looks at Naomi and knows that Ruth, and knows that Ruth has no security and no future. Naomi, who owes nothing to Ruth because Ruth is not her own progeny, is not her own child, still does her best, perhaps because of Ruth's love, adoration, and care, to make sure that Ruth will be cared for. Ruth clearly looks up to Naomi, and so when Naomi offers this pathway and says, here's what you're going to do, we see Ruth execute this exactly as Naomi lays out. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but I suppose, again, where we get into trouble is looking at this like entrapment. That as soon as Boaz, tired out from threshing all day and being on the threshing floor, leaves the party and goes to sleep, maybe in an altered state of mind, we're not sure. We have food and drink mentioned, but it doesn't mention in any way inebriation in how we would think of it. We have the encouragement then to go and be with him. The one translation talked about uncovering his feet, and there may be good rationale for that. I haven't explored that scholastically as far as what uncovering the feet may have as far as meaning behind it. The Message translation, though, I think offers us a little better picture in that regard. It's lie at his feet and let him know you're available to him for marriage, which is she's not just climbing in his bed, but follows him off to his chambers where she offers him the opportunity for marriage with her. So, again, this is, we could look at this a very different way and say Ruth is being very, Naomi by extension, proactive in a time in which it was always arranged by or through the men, through the husband's family or the husband-to-be's family, or the husband itself in finding somebody who they were going to be married to. Ruth takes this initiative by Naomi's inclination, goes to Boaz, sits at his feet, and essentially says, I am interested in marriage to you. Now, what Naomi says following this, it's sort of, this is as much instruction as she gives, is see what he says, and then he'll tell you what to do. We don't know sort of what happened after that. Things cut pretty quickly to there being relations. Now, what we have, beyond Ruth saying, if you say so, I'll do it, is she's going to carry out what Naomi has laid out as this plan for her security. The next verse that we come up to is the skip ahead into, the 4th chapter, and that picks up with the 13th verse. And in the Message, again, I kind of prefer that because it says Boaz married Ruth, she became his wife, and they were together. Boaz slept with her. By God's gracious gift, she conceived and had a son. Is if we move from then wait and see what he says, he'll tell you what to do next, is that allows perhaps for me, rather than an entrapment that she climbed into his bed and then by virtue of pregnancy, entrapped him into marriage, was she came to his feet and says, I would like to marry you. And he then proposes. makes a proposal relative to their relationship, which ultimately leads to their marriage. So no entrapment, no premarital relations, if read in this way, which for me is perhaps a more comfortable way to read it. And so it's only after they're married that then what unfolds. And what ultimately unfolds is what provides the security not only for Ruth, which is her marriage to Boaz, but ultimately the child that she bears, but also it provides security to Naomi, because being Ruth's mother-in-law, in this case, Ruth's only family, Naomi acts as caretaker, as nursemaid to Obed, but also as Ruth's family, so will be taken care of by virtue of her marriage to Boaz. So two women who had absolutely nothing end up by the end of the story secure and safe, but through some very proactive things that they did, which show, a contradiction, a difference to societal norms in taking that risk or that authority of saying, I wish to marry you, being the one that proposes marriage to Boaz rather than the other way around. So let's go from that into Hebrews. And again, we've skipped a whole bunch in Hebrews. I'll read through both translations, then offer you a brief little reflection on them. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made by human hands, a mere copy of the true one, but he entered into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself again and again as the high priest enters the holy place year after year with blood that is not his own, for then he would have had to suffer again and again since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the age to remove sin by the sacrifice of himself. And just as it is appointed for mortals to die once, and after that the judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. Here is the Message variant of the same passage. For Christ didn't enter the earthly version of the holy place. He entered the place itself and offered himself to God as the sacrifice for our sins. He doesn't do this every year as the high priests did under the old plan with blood that was not their own. If that had been the case, he would have to sacrifice himself repeatedly throughout the course of history. But instead, he sacrificed himself once and for all, summing up all the other sacrifices in this sacrifice of himself, the final solution of sin. Everyone has to die once, then face the consequences. Christ's death was also a one-time event, but it was a sacrifice that took care of sins forever. And so when he next appears, the outcome for those eager to greet him is precisely salvation. As I've said in past installments of Exploring Sunday Scriptures, Hebrews is a letter written to Jewish converts to Christianity who've kind of fallen on hard times or at least stagnated in their faith development. And this is serves as an encouragement to them to restart that faith development, that faith of theirs, but also to help them recognize the deep link between the Jewish past, the Hebrew past, and Christ as a fulfillment of that. So when we listen to passages like this, it does seem to reach back in that way to then reach into the present and to the future. So this talks about Christ entering the sanctuary. In this case, it means the sanctuary of heaven or the sanctuary of God's presence. Now, the temple in Jerusalem had within it the Holy of Holies, the most sacred of places, which was considered a place of an intersection between heaven and earth. Talking about Christ entering the sanctuary or the holy place is not talking about something that was created like the Holy of Holies in the temple with human hands, but that which is true, which is of God, so in heaven above, so eternal. And in that way, Christ is performing similarly what the priests do in that human created, the one built by human hands, sanctuary. So it was the custom that sacrifices to God, these were particularly animal sacrifices, would be offered to God by the priests. And once a year, the high priest entered the Holy of Holies on behalf of the people to seek out forgiveness for their sins. This is positing that Jesus performs that same function as the high priest did, but doesn't enter something created with human hands, but enters heaven itself. It enters right before the very presence of God, and doesn't have to repeat this as is done in the human created place in the Holy of Holies, but only has to do it once and for all. And that his sacrifice, so rather than sacrificing something in place of us, he sacrifices his very self for us, is good enough once and for all without a need to be repeated annually. Now, it talks about judgment and encourages. So here we have reaching into the practice and rituals of Judaism, the sacrifices in the temple, the Holy of Holies, the once a year entry and seeking the forgiveness of sins. Christ's, so here's the present, how in Jesus this is a one-time sacrifice, but not done in that place, but done in heaven. And then we enter into the future. So past, present, future, which links us into judgment. So in Hebrew understanding, these sacrifices were repeated until death, when one would stand before God for judgment, which we get our same ideas about judgment from that. Now, Christ, who does this once and for all and never has to repeat this again, it also says will appear a second time. So this is sort of after our dying once, that second coming of Christ. But this is for salvation. Now, maybe there is judgment tied up with that too, but it doesn't really lean upon judgment as much as grace, as much as salvation. So it's intending to show past, present, future, how through the past, in the present reality, that was amended and changed towards our future salvation, towards our future, the future of existing and living with God alone. All right, I see I've already gone over 20 minutes. I want to keep us below 30. So let me shift over to the Gospel of Matthew. This is chapter 12, verses 38 through 44. As Jesus taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogue and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." And here is the Message variant. Jesus continued teaching, "Watch out for the religion scholars. They love to walk around in academic gowns, preening in the radiance of public flattery, basking in prominent positions, sitting at the head table at every church function. And all the time they are exploiting the weak and helpless. The longer their prayers, the worse they get, but they'll pay for it in the end." Sitting across from the offering box, he was observing how the crowd tossed money in for the collection. Many of the rich were making large contributions. One poor widow came up and put in 2 small coins, a measly 2 cents. Jesus called his disciples over and said, "The truth is that this poor widow gave more to the collection than all the others put together. All the others gave what they'll never miss. She gave extravagantly what she couldn't afford. She gave her all." So the basis of having these two different sort of episodes in the same place, to be fair, together is to juxtapose one set of figures over the other figure of this passage. So one set of figures is these scribes, so these religious scholars, is how the Message translation describes them. And that's what the scribes were. The scribes were those who scribed, who wrote down. We didn't have printing presses then. So they became experts by virtue of their writing on religion, on religious law. And by virtue of that expertise, in some ways, by virtue of their very birth, they became very important people within their culture. By virtue of that importance, they had an expectation of what that would mean. So they were signified to their culture by these long robes that they wore. So it gave them acknowledgement within the broader society based on the garments that they wore. They had an expectation of how they would be greeted. So the reverence accorded to them within the public market space. So as they went about, there was a sense that they had a deserved position and that the greetings afforded them were unique because of that position. And finally, they had an expectation that their seats would always be in an honored place. So you might say they wouldn't have to sit with the common folks. They got a very, very honored place, whether that be in houses of worship or whether that be at banquets, at big festivals. Now, alongside of that, Jesus acknowledges that by virtue of that position, many widows, what they have left when they die ends up going to these religious scholars, ends up given to these religious scholars. And so they don't really do work, but are left with all of this wealth as a result of those who don't have it to leave to any others, so they leave it to them, and also have a tendency to be very verbose. That's why I try to keep this to 30 minutes. Beware of those religious scholars. Now, this is a warning, a shot across the bow to them, to beware of them, to not trust them, because their behaviors do not exhibit what it is to link oneself in with God, to rely upon God, to trust God with your whole self. Now, Jesus has already tried to encounter with the rich young man. You need to leave everything if you're going to follow me. Said to James and John, who want to sit on his left and right, you have to be servant of all. So we continue to have these teachings about the least being the greatest and the greatest being the least. And in this case, he is with the disciples sitting, watching those who are giving to the offering, who are putting money into the treasury at the temple. And his observation is that those who are wealthy are giving generously. It's not a condemnation of them, but there's no real sacrifice on their part relative to their giving. So they're giving out of their wealth, but it really doesn't make an impact on their life at all. And then he observes this poor widow. So a widow who really has nothing themselves, because everything they have is by virtue of the family that they are married into. So someone who doesn't have anything and has no income, no way to support themselves, who comes and by virtue of their faith, so the fundamentals of what they believe has brought what they can to also contribute, as this is part of what it is to participate in this faith in the one true God. And that has, in this case, is just a couple of small coins, a couple of pennies. And Jesus uplifts her after saying, don't trust those who have it all as the one who does have it all. So a juxtaposition of the two. And why does she have it all? Because what she has done is she has given truly what she has. She has really made a sacrifice out of her faith. Now, it's not a sacrifice just to uphold the treasury of the temple. The sacrifice is an expression of her faith in God, and of her desire to participate in the kingdom of God, in the sense of the kingdom work of God, giving all you can that it may go to help those, and seeing even in your unfortunate circumstance that you can also do something which may reach out in the name of God to someone else that might be going through something challenging. The scribes who simply take from this as the difference. So this is a well-known passage, the widow's mite, as it is well known as, and does challenge us in the sense of, what does it look like in our lives to truly make an offering or a sacrifice to God? Not just material in the sense of the money that we contribute to the church or otherwise, but what it really looks like to make a sacrifice to God as Jesus sacrificed for us. What are the things which we would have to contribute that would really show a sense of our faith in God? Is it our time? Is it, I don't know what it might be. You might have to answer that for yourself. So these are our three passages for this week. Ruth chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, chapter 4, verses 13 through 17, Hebrews chapter 9, verses 24 through 28, and Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 44. I encourage you to go back to them again and look forward to exploring them with you as we gather for worship this Sunday, October 31st. God bless you.